You're listening to the Slavic Connection.
It's not typical Texas.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Michael Mosser. I'm the Executive Director of the Global Disinformation Lab, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you here today to what is going to be an amazing panel hosted by U.S. Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy, Liz Allen. My role here is just on behalf of the university to welcome you, and I'm going to turn it over to our moderator to give you the bios of the panelists. But I do want to say, right, on behalf of President Hartzell and of the LBJ School Dean DeShazo, it's great to have everybody here on a Monday morning of South by, Monday morning of spring break. It's great to see so many of you in the audience here. Today's discussion of building a healthy and resilient information space is possibly one of the most important discussions that you're going to hear this week if you're going to anything in South by. This is a story, you'll hear this word come up in the conversation, a narrative that is very much in the public space, in the zeitgeist right now. And those two words, healthy and resilient, are words that mean something really important, especially when we're talking about information and information disorders. And so I can't wait to hear what the panelists have to say about this. I'm going to stop talking very shortly and turn it over to Sherri. But I want you to think about these two words, right? Healthy, possessing good health, and resilient, kind of able to recover quickly. Both of these things are something that we as a society and we as a global society, when we're talking about information, need to really kind of work hard to do. We do this in the Global Disinformation Lab. We do this at UT as educators. We do this worldwide as information consumers. So I expect we're going to hear a lot of really great things coming from the panelists today. I'd like to introduce our moderator. Our moderator today is Sherri Greenberg. She's the Assistant Dean for State and Local Government Engagement. She's a professor of practice and the fellow with the Max Sherman Chair in State and Local Government here at the LBJ School of Public Affairs. She is a primary researcher for and is chairperson-elect of Good Systems, the University of Texas Grand Challenge regarding ethical AI. Sherri's a member of the board of the Austin Convention Center Enterprise. She serves on the Austin Smart City Alliance Board of Directors and the Austin Forum for Technology and Society Advisory Board. She was previously a member of the Central Health Board of Managers and a member of the City of Austin Housing Investment Review Committee. She was also a senior advisor to Mayor Steve Adler and was a Texas State Representative from 1991 to 2001. Needless to say, Sherri's a perfect moderator for this particular panel, and I can't wait to hear from you. So I'm going to turn it over to her to introduce the panelists, and thanks very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the important work that you are doing. It is such a gem at University of Texas at Austin. It is a great privilege and honor to have here with us today the Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy. Liz Allen is Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy at the Department of State, where she leads a team of almost 5,000 professionals around the world and oversees a budget of $1.5 billion. Yes, with a B, billion. She previously served as Assistant Secretary of State for Global Public Affairs. Allen spent 7 years in the Obama-Biden White House, including as White House Deputy Communications Director and Director of Communications for then President Biden. I think she knows a little something about information. She's a veteran of Democratic campaigns and international public affairs and crisis communications consulting, and began her career as the U.S. Department of State in the Office of Global Women's Issues, very pertinent now, and Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement. What a career, and we are honored to have you with us here today. Other panelists with us here today, we have, of course, with us Andrew Augustin. Andrew, welcome. He is an award-winning 2D illustrator, game designer, founder of Notion Games LLC, and an assistant professor of practice in game design here at the University of Texas. His gaming portfolio includes designing the characters for the Sims 3 Pets video game. I do love dogs. He's also the creator of his own line of video games, including Super Ubi Island 1 and Super Ubi Island 2, Up Ubi Remix, Sheep Herder Nay, and Team Notion. One of his current projects is working with Microsoft to bring Super Ubi Island to Xbox. Congratulations. Next to him, Sewell Chan. Sewell joined the Texas Tribune as editor-in-chief in October 2021, and he has quickly made his mark. Previously, he was a deputy managing editor and then the editorial page editor at the Los Angeles Times, where he oversaw coverage that was awarded a Pulitzer Prize for editorial writing in 2021. Chan worked at the New York Times from 2004 to 2018 as a Metro reporter, Washington correspondent, deputy op-ed editor, and international news editor. He began his career as a local reporter at the Washington Post in 2000. A child of immigrants, Chan was the first in his family to graduate from college. He has a degree in social studies from Harvard and a master's in political science from Oxford, where he studied on a British Marshall Scholarship. He serves on the boards of Columbia Review, Freedom House, and others. Matthew Orr, to my right here, is a Eurasia analyst at RANE, R-A-N-E, formerly known as Stratfor, with some rebranding there. He focuses on analysis of geopolitical, political, economic, and security issues in Eurasia. Prior to RANE, Matt lived and worked in Russia, where he taught English through the Fulbright English Teaching Assistant Program. Matt holds a bachelor's in Russian language and literature from George Washington University and dual master's degrees in global policy studies from the LBJ School and Russian, Eastern European, and Eurasian studies. He is fluent in English, Russian, and Ukrainian. Impressive. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here with us today and giving us some of your valuable time. And thank you to our audience for joining us today. We know that you could be doing other things on this bright sunny day, so thank you. I would like to start here with our privilege here to have with us the Undersecretary and start with the question for Undersecretary Allen. Undersecretary Allen, in a year where over 70% of the world's population is voting in major elections, 70%, over 70%, many of which have already occurred, right? How critical is the role of international cooperation in ensuring the integrity of the information space? And what steps can governments take to foster this collaboration?
Oh, wow. Well, thank you and good morning. It's so great to have everybody here. Really privileged to be here with this whole panel. As we were speaking just before this, it does take every sector, government, academia, creative arts, private industry, independent media, to think about this problem and to think about what we're going to do about this problem. Let me first get out of the way that I did not purposely wear Aggies colors today, so let me just make my loyalty known here on campus up with horns. So it's really nice to be here at UT. Thank you for the warm welcome. Thank you to the LBJ School, to the Global Disinformation Lab. Really strong partners between the U.S. State Department and the entire UT system, particularly those here at UT Austin. There's some incredible work being done, a lot of it in partnership with us, and for that we're very grateful. So a couple thoughts, maybe I'll organize my own thoughts into 3 buckets here to answer this big old question about what we're doing about the information space and why it matters. The first is, we're in a moment where we need to more comprehensively and publicly diagnose what we mean by a healthy and resilient information space. All of us are consumers of information in myriad ways: traditional media, social media, emerging closed platforms like WhatsApp, Signal, and Telegram, open source information, information from around the world. And what we know now is that the information space, where we all understand the world as we know it, is more complex, more crowded, and more contested than ever before. And it's really difficult to sort of understand what a shared truth should be. And so I would argue that the information space today is foundational to every issue across this country and across the world, because we cannot pretend to solve all of our shared challenges, be they climate change, hunger, global health, whatever these shared challenges we're all confronting are, if we don't understand them. And to understand challenges and issues, we have to be working off a set of what we hope is truthful, credible information. And so there isn't a single colleague, for example, of mine in Washington, D.C., whether it's those who work on chem bioweapons, those who work on Middle East peace, those who work on global health, that don't think about how to make sure people understand their issue, that they're not plagued by disinformation narratives, and that they can hope to tell a story with effective messaging and consequences of the human experience to help advance their policy forward. So I guess first I would just say that in this moment, the information space isn't a communications issue. This isn't just a matter of narratives and strategic narratives. It's not an intelligence issue. A lot of times we think about how to analyze what's going on in the information space, to say nothing of what we know Russia and China and Iran and others are doing to weaponize and manipulate the information space. But it's really much bigger than that. It's really foundational to what we're doing. That's kind of the first diagnosis piece. Hi everybody, come on in. That brings us to what do we do about it? And to the question, Sherri, thank you for asking, what can we be doing amongst governments? What can we be doing amongst stakeholders across, we see it here, everybody represented. What can we be doing? And from the government standpoint, from the federal government standpoint, we're trying to do a lot of work to better analyze and understand what's going on in the information space. We do want to know how disinformation narratives spread. We do want to know where China's using propaganda or Russia's using disinformation to try to sow division. But we also want to try to make that space, this ecosystem, healthier to begin with, right? Think about your own information diets, your own friends and family. I'll think about my own friends and family. It's really hard to get past first impressions. It's really hard once people believe something to say, that's not true, this is instead. So what do? We need to try to make this space healthier to begin with. That means, from where the US government sits, an enormous investment in independent media across the world. And Sewell's going to talk about the importance of independent media. That means making sure that governments and institutions think about strategic communications and proactive storytelling and proactive narratives as an imperative, not just a nice to have. We actually have to be putting more truthful information, more credible, compelling information into the world to begin with, right? We can't just hope to beat back lies with truths or fiction with facts. And it's also important to think about making sure audiences themselves are resilient to disinformation, to malign information. We have to make people think about the information space as an area of discipline. I would love to see us teach media literacy in schools starting early on, so that students understand, we were talking about this before, students understand the difference between, a newspaper of record with editorial standards and a citizen blogger, and at worst, trolls and bots that are acting upon them. They need to understand what the algorithm does to reinforce bias in this world. So I think the education about this is really important. Last thing I'll say, and then I don't want to go on too long. We're really proud of the U.S. Department of State right now to be prioritizing this issue as a matter of policy, which means we're working hard to put more infrastructure around this policy issue, right? When you think about a policy issue, let's just take global health. You think about initiatives like PEPFAR, enormously important bipartisan global public health effort on AIDS and the AIDS crisis under President Bush. You think about all of the work being done by the CDC and the World Health Organization to tackle this issue. We need to start thinking about the information space as a holistic public policy issue that way, and we're working on that. So the State Department is signing MOUs with countries around the world. I was in Japan and Korea signing an MOU with each of them in December. We are putting out policy frameworks so that governments can start to think about how to tackle this together. And I can go on, but I'm not going to because we have to hear from everybody. I'm so pleased to be here. Thank you for your interest, and we're looking forward to a discussion.
Thank you so much. And as you know, policy is near and dear to my heart. I'd like to turn now to Andrew. Andrew, as someone who sits at the intersection of technology and creativity, what unique challenges and opportunities do you see in building a healthy information space, particularly in engaging young and diverse audiences in a digital area that, as we know, has so much noise and chaos right now?
First off, can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Okay, cool. That's a really good question. I thought about it for a little while, especially being more on the creative side of things, right? I'm a 2D animator, game designer, content creator as a whole, right? But also I'm an educator. And seeing both sides of that world, I see the content creation side is very influential. And it really does affect, the youth. They tend to use TikTok and Instagram and all these platforms that are pretty much heavily I guess taken over by creators, right? Content creators. So one of the challenges is really being able to educate them on what content, has malign information, what content has real, unbiased information. Memes have taken over like crazy. All you need to do is have Photoshop, take a picture, put a title, put it out there. It's probably going to be shared 500,000 times. Nobody fact checks it or anything. So as a content creator, there is power there, right? Because we can really actually change the opinion of a lot, especially the youth, because they don't really dive too much into, you can have an article attached to everything, but most people won't even click the article. So one of the challenges is just really kind of letting content creators kind of understand what power we do have, and also, the responsibility, as a creator, I don't want to tell people what they can and cannot create. If you want to create memes, I guess you're free to do so, right? But we do hold power and we do hold responsibility of, what the outcomes are of our creation. I'm not as holier than thou kind of creator, but I create a lot of content that my children can enjoy. I could create a bunch of content that could mislead a bunch of people and all kinds of things, but I just have a moral standpoint when I'm creating, right? I don't want to create stuff and put it out there that can lead to, people getting in disputes or, influencing the youth to not feel good about themselves, or suicide rates going up and all this kind of stuff that really does affect a lot of the youth in general. On the education side of things, since I know content is power, a lot of the stuff that really, even myself and my generation, playing video games and interactive media really is a very influential thing. It still is to this day. So, if we come together to create content like that with educators, and again, I'm on both sides of the fence, so, as a content creator, if we work with educators and really work to create content that's engaging for the students to want to learn and be able to discern the difference between, what is fake news, what is real, etc. I think that would be a very effective way to really kind of, touch the youth and at least get them on the right track, and being able to tell the difference between what is just a meme and actually care. Some of them know it's a meme, but that's the culture, right? So they're looking for the memes. But we can really educate them on why it's important to really dig deeper beyond just a headline that you see that's shared, all across Instagram. Understand that media is just that, a parody or a skit or a reel is just that. But, they take a lot of, what they call all of us, I'm sorry, it's like all over the place. So what they call all of us, like influencers. It's influencers, right? Because we influence so much. Can I get my mic? Kind of adjust it a little bit. I know it sounds like that.
IT here. If everybody were to kill the mics other than him, it was Mike.
Oh, is that better? Okay, good. Okay, sorry about that. So yeah, if we so we come together to kind of create content that will allow to educate the youth, and I think we really need to start early, because the youth is touching on this kind of content at a very young age. As a teacher, I worked at a high school and I'm a professor at UT. So I've seen, different age groups and where they're at mentally, and how technology affects them, and content with information. A lot of students don't even know how to type on a keyboard, but they can pull out their phone and go crazy, right? Like, they don't know a lot of different things. So that lets me see that they're really living in this digital, phone world. They're really living in Instagram. They're really living in TikTok. And again, it's filled with a lot of information that can negatively impact or misguide you. So to me, the challenge is really just kind of, getting enough content creators to, again, understand their power. Maybe working with education, facilities and things like that to really kind of create engaging content to get the attention of the youth to even understand what this information is and start from there, And that's kind of where my perspective is, at least on that question that you asked.
Secretary, what do you think about that?
I love this. Content is power. And a lot of creators are understanding the responsibility of that power, and really appreciate that perspective, Andrew. I would just say on behalf of the US government, a large bureaucratic institution that, like many large bureaucratic institutions, are coming to terms with what it means to effectively communicate and follow the fundamental principle of communications. Comms 101, meet people where they are. And in this complex information space, I think a lot of institutions, be they academia, be they private companies, anybody who's trying to market anything, they recognize they need to meet people where they are. And so to this point, and let me be very clear, these institutions know they can't tell creators what to do. We would never pretend to impose any kind of, expectations. But just like we talk to reporters, we need to be talking to content creators. There's a reason why last week for the State of the Union, hello, Lane Ogden, who works in global public affairs in Washington, D.C. and is an expert in this. There's a reason why last week for the State of the Union, the White House did what they've done for 40 years. And bring in the anchors of all the major TV networks to have lunch with the president on the day of the State of the Union to understand the themes of the speech, so there can be effective coverage. And also, for the second year in a row, the White House also brought in TikTok creators. Because it's a different information imperative for TikTok creators versus, for example, the TV networks. They're bound by different regulations. But we have to be talking to everyone. Creators deserve the respect, in my view. Creators deserve the opportunity to be talking to people to help inform their audiences should they choose that. And it's time for institutions to really understand how to harness that power.
Thank you so much, Secretary. And Andrew, thank you for being such a responsible role model as a content creator and an educator. And certainly so much of what you had to speak of regarding content and responsibility is something that Sewell is very familiar with in his role at the Texas Tribune. So Sewell, from a journalist perspective, what role do you see journalism playing in the broader effort to create a healthy and resilient information space? And how can journalists navigate the challenge of misinformation, and I would even add disinformation, while maintaining public trust, which is so important?
Thank you, Sherri. Thank you for all coming here. Journalists have a vital role to play. We also have an evolving role. Journalism, we all remember that, not directly necessarily, but we remember a time when there were 3 major networks, right? When news was just more centralized and information came from a fewer sources than now. And now we're in an era of an infinite multiplicity of sources of information. So what role does news play? We're not the traditional gatekeepers, like we're the only ones who know what's going on, and we breathlessly reveal it and you find out from us. Most people are finding out news as it happens. They're watching events in real time, or they're watching videos, or they're watching TikTok influencers explain the news. So if the information landscape is changing, what role do journalists play? We bring a set of professional norms centered around fairness, accuracy, context, balance, verification. We don't say trust us because we're the news media. We say trust us because we are a set of professionals who are obligated by professional norms to try to cover things fairly. And I think we're at the Texas Tribune, we're part of initiatives like the Trust Project, which seek to kind of certify news organizations that are worthy of trust and credibility because they follow these professional norms. Now the work is getting harder. 1/3 of American newspaper jobs one-third of American newspapers, have closed since the great financial crisis. And about 1/2 of newspaper employees have lost their jobs in the last 15 years. So where has this been felt the most? It's been felt the most at the state and local level, where even state governments, state legislatures, localities are no longer being covered. We have across America right now, on any given day, countless school board meetings, town council, city council, water district meetings where there's no one to cover it. I know this because I go to rural Texas, I talk to local communities where they are actually desperate for coverage, which may seem surprising. It used to be government officials were a little afraid of coverage, or what are the tough questions that are going to be asked. It's gotten so dire now that I hear from local officials who are like, thank God someone's covering our issue, our panel, our legislative committee, because there's so little coverage, and without that coverage, we have loss of understanding, we have rising mistrust, lower civic engagement, and greater polarization. So I want to distinguish between like elite media, right? I spent many years at the New York Times. It's great. It's serving people who are well-educated, sophisticated, informed, cosmopolitan, want to be informed. That's a very influential audience. That's not the vast majority. The vast majority of folks are trying to understand what's going on in their community. And I'll close with one thing. You know how the Tip O'Neill phrase used to be all politics is local? Well, I hear increasingly it's all politics is national, in the sense that if people are only getting their information from highly opinionated cable news, whether right or left, and they think journalism, they think, oh, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, CNN, they think about people kind of, debating each other and sometimes shouting at each other. If that's their picture of news, that's a very unbalanced picture. I mostly focus on the federal level. Well, what happens K-12 education, mental health, whether your streets are clean, sanitation, whether your water supply is safe? Congress and the president have very little to do with that. It's mostly what happens in your community, your county, maybe the state legislature when it comes to things like K-12 funding and public health, as Sherri knows. So it's like we almost have an imbalanced perspective as Americans of our own government. And that imbalance is causing some of the democratic erosion that we're seeing.
So thank you for being such a trusted source. And Matt, I want to turn now to your invaluable experience. Drawing from your experience with English language programs and teaching English overseas, could you share insights on how these programs contribute to combating misinformation in complex information spaces and their effectiveness in prompting critical thinking and media literacy among diverse populations? And I want to add that I think critical thinking is an imperative. Matt?
Yeah, absolutely. Thinking about answering that, I think there's kind of two main buckets that I think about how international education programs, English language, teaching abroad and things like that really help make our information space more healthy and resilient. The first bucket is about what it does to the people who participate, the Americans who are part of these programs. You kind of have to go back to first principles and think about media literacy and think about how different this information environment is that I'm going into. There's still so much separation between these information environments, particularly for a place like Russia. So I did the Fulbright English teaching program abroad there for a year in 2017, and things have changed immensely even since I was there. But I wouldn't be able to do the job that I do now without having participated in that program, which was a U.S. government-sponsored program, because of the skills I got doing that, because of the human connections that I made during that time, that allow me to then be in this information space, this environment, and provide people objective geopolitical analysis about what Russia's interests are, what people in Russia really think. These are questions that ultimately have immense effects on what's going on in our own country. And so that's kind of one way. That's kind of one way to approach this. But the side that I think is almost more interesting is the effect that these kinds of programs have on the people. For example, in Russia, a place like that, it always blew my mind how when I would give a talk about American culture, for example, music, art, history, the rooms where these discussions were taking place were overflowing with people. There was just such an immense interest, and if this program didn't exist, this demand would not be met in any way, essentially whatsoever. And then people would all the time. I lived in a former closed city. It's Izhevsk in Russia. It's the site of the Kalashnikov weapons factory. It was a closed city actually in the Soviet times, and so there was even higher demand for kind of this, piercing this information bubble. And so people would tell me all the time, you're the first American I've ever met. And that's a powerful thing. And so ultimately, you're engaging with these audiences, you're helping them further develop, their critical thinking skills. You're kind of activating a place of their own way to grapple with these questions that they might not necessarily would be otherwise, because you're really kind of piercing a bubble for them, and then ultimately that prompts an exchange where you have these human connections and you're communicating constantly, and questions arise all the time about, well, is this really true about America, or is this really true about Russia? And so I think that English language and the programs that do this are really essential to moving away from this two different environments to more of a common space, which I presume is something like the goal that we're headed towards, something closer to a common truth.
And Matt, thank you so much for your service. I think we have time for a couple of questions. And we have some folks with mics. Is there anyone in the audience? I see someone up here. I see two. One here and then one there. Gentleman here and a woman.
I'm happy to ask.
Do you have a mic?
No, I don't need a mic, though. I'm very loud. My name is Sean Van Diver. I lead Afghan EVAC. We see misinformation creating a lot of problems for folks who are trying to make their way to the United States to get there. American dream is different. My question is, how can folks partner with the U.S. government? I've been suggesting that the government do social media ads because that's where people are getting their information. And what we keep hearing is like, ooh, that's really hard. So we'd love to know where that's working.
Okay, Secretary.
Great question, and thank you for being here, Sean, and for the work you're doing. He had his own panel yesterday, which critically important work that's being done, and to great success, actually. So a couple things here. A lot to unravel in the question, Sean. And the first thing, maybe where you ended, is the U.S. government knows we need to make it easier to work with us. Number one, right? I had a conversation with a lot of my DoD colleagues yesterday about the fact that, well, everyone's so focused on technological advancement and acquiring new technologies, new tactics, countering disinformation. We can't do any of that if we don't make it easier to work with us from a contracting, procurement, and acquisitions matter, to say nothing of actually trying to schedule a meeting and get in the room with people, right? So there's a lot of effort underway, which this may sound a little bureaucratic. There's a lot of effort underway to just be thoughtful about how we communicate and to make sure that there's space for people in a room for open discussion, to say nothing of actually figuring out how to execute better public-private partnerships, in a shorter amount of time with less red tape. So that's some of the answer. But I think that's a little bit of the technical part of your question. The spirit of the question, I think, is very much, how do we think about messengers? And where are people getting their information? Who are they listening to, right? Whether it is Afghans trying to come to the United States, whether it is any migrant potentially coming to the United States, we think about this problem a lot. Who are they listening to? And in some cases, the U.S. government has to be more forthright with our own messaging and facts. So we actually, great news, we're doing paid ads on social media. Yes, progress. But also, I am someone who, in the U.S. government, has very clear eyes about the credibility and reach limits of our voice. We know that we're not always trusted. We have to work to continue to build that trust. I believe that our differentiator, particularly vis-a-vis Russia, China, and others, is our credibility. So we are working to make sure that our strategies and our tactics build credibility and trust between the United States and people all over the world. But that's a long-term proposition. So in the short term, we think about who are audiences listening to and how do we get them in the room? How do we equip people who have influence over audiences, whether they be content creators or journalists or leaders of NGOs and philanthropies? How do we partner with them better to equip with information? What Sean didn't tell you is that he and I were talking yesterday a little bit about this. And one of the things we share that is not necessarily shared by all of our colleagues is we can't be afraid of the truth. We can't be afraid of information. And we can't be afraid of sharing information. And for a lot of reasons, there is still, I think, a sense in a lot of institutions that if we don't talk about it, no one will think about it. If we don't talk about it, it'll go away. That's just not the case, right? To use the old media rubric, you don't make a bad story better by not participating in it. You make a bad story a little bit less bad by making sure that your equities are represented. When I worked in the White House, we didn't expect good coverage. We expected fair coverage. And if you expect fair coverage, you need to be a player in that conversation. And I think the same principle applies to generally speaking to audiences writ large.
Thank you so much. I think we had another question. Did I say another in the audience? Yes.
Good morning. Undersecretary, thank you for being here. My name is Rebecca Taylor. I'm an executive in residence at the Austin Technology Incubator, which is both a unit in the University of Texas and the longest running incubator in the country. And it's a bunch of pro bono mentor coaches at the end of the day. I served happily at the State Department in 2010, 11, and 12 in the Office of the Science Advisor to the Secretary. In 2011, I noticed with interest that when the question came up about how should we use Twitter, the answer came back, no. Stay away. I'm sure that has changed over the last 10, 11, 12 years. But I'm curious in the context of my observation as, you know, an IEEE diplomacy fellow, so I was an observer. My observation back then was that a challenge the State Department has is to make space so that rationality can take over and better decisions get made no matter what the topic is. That is way harder in an online environment. And your answer and what you were saying 2 minutes ago kind of began to go towards answering my question. But how are you coming and what are the top 2 challenges that you have in making that safe space so that people can take a minute and not get angry when they're trying to think with the front of their brain instead of the back of their brain so that we get better decisions across the globe?
Better decisions, Undersecretary?
Yes, thank you for the question. There's a lot there. I think like a lot of large institutions, my first reaction is that speed remains a challenge, no matter what, right? Because the bureaucracy and red tape and not just in that, but also as any large institution trying to understand the equities across the entire institution, it slows you down. And in some cases that's important. I guess what I would offer is there's a tension between speed and credibility very often, right? And I think journalism feels this as well. You want to get out in front of any issue, any narrative, any emerging technology, to be on the cutting edge, to be relevant, to resonate. But if you move too fast and you misstep, does that hurt your credibility worse in the long term? There's no way to solve that. There's no monolithic approach to that. There's no answer to it. It's just the tension that exists in all of our decision making. And my colleague Elaine, who I mentioned before, who leads our research and analytics for all of our global digital public affairs, we think a lot about this question. Where are we missing opportunity because we're too slow? And where is prudence actually a necessary virtue to not harm our long-term credibility? That's a challenge for any institution, particularly in government. But I would ask anybody else to comment on this too.
Other views? So?
Well, we're talking specifically about, creating a better public sphere, right? I mean, a lot of it has to deal with a crisis of trust that I think is going on across Western societies. And it's not just trust in government, and it's not just trust in media, but trust in institutions in general, even universities, has eroded. Now, the reasons are very complex, but I actually think trust can be rebuilt. But it does require probably a different form of communication than a lot of institutions have been used to. You know, we're returning, I think, in some ways to ancient forms of communication that never left us. Storytelling, meeting people face to face, eye to eye, live events, public events like this one, which COVID deprived us of. And trust building cannot just happen only in scale or only on social media. If anything, social media, it's accompanied by the rise of loneliness, the rise of isolation. So I think the trust challenge is one that affects institutions at large. But one thing, I think we learned from COVID is that even trust and expertise, or maybe especially trust and expertise, scholarship, authority, knowledge seeking, unfortunately that trust has eroded. I think during COVID, a lot of people were like, oh, the scientists, they're not in 100% agreement, therefore they're not credible. It's like, well, actually, the way science works is hypotheses and evidence. To test hypotheses, to build up evidence. And any scientist will say it's never 100% certain, especially when you're dealing with a global pandemic raging through. But people took the fact that there was even a hint of uncertainty to say, well, maybe no one can trust you. And I think we still have a chance to pull back from the brink. But the outcome I fear the most is going from skepticism, which is always healthy, to cynicism or nihilism, which are not. And that's the kind of fear that I see. And I think all of us who are involved in content creation, getting messages out, combating disinformation, we all have our role to play to avoid that nihilism.
Thank you. Other questions? I see one up here.
I have no credentials at all.
Welcome.
Tourist.
Everyone has credentials.
I'm a tourist from Michigan who was coming to see the library, and they said,
welcome.
I'm here. So. My question is about AI.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that, the advantages, disadvantages, and how much regulation should be placed on it?
We could have a whole panel on this.
In fact, we could have a whole research initiative. It's called Good Systems here at UT on it.
Or a whole self-service.
The one I'm chairing, yeah. Please
For
do.
the last question, so I guess we can just kind of piggyback off of that. We're talking about speed, right, and being able to trust. Unfortunately, I might have a more pessimistic view about it, but like, unfortunately, with AI, speed is, you just can't go back. AI is going to be fast, it's going to put out information, it's going to evolve, the information, content itself is going to evolve. You know, AI is now able to create videos where we can't even tell if it's real or not. So things are going to get crazy with that. And even with, 100 people, we have 100 people, and 99 of them are creating, healthy, good information. All it takes is one person. And then with these tools that are available today, they can still churn out a bunch of disinformation, a bunch of bad content. So it's going to exist. We're just in it. Like, we're going to have bad content and misinformation. And I think really the point is, it's not necessarily don't use a platform, it's just educate people on how to tell, bad content from good content. I think that's really the key, because there's always going to be bad apples, right?
Other thoughts, Phil?
Yeah, I think, those of us who care a lot about high quality, verified news and information are really worried about the problem you identified. We're going to have deep fakes, synthetic video or audio. It used to be like, oh, well, it's recording. I taped that. This is legit. And you're not going to be able to say that because was this tape doctored? Who had this tape? How do you know it was recorded at the meeting you say it was recorded at? How do I know this video of a famous person speaking is really that person? The technology is becoming so more sophisticated. Unfortunately, someone's going to be able to, record video of a public official and then using metadata and large language, et cetera, be able to make it seem like they're saying something they didn't say. Now that's really worrisome, especially, I don't envy your job in the government, warning against that. I do think that, look, there's positive and negative outcomes to any disruptive technology. The most negative outcome would be an information apocalypse, where just there's nothing that is known or trustworthy or credible anymore. Man, I want to avoid that outcome. The positive outcome, and I think about this a lot in journalism, there are things that we do as journalists that just aren't that useful anymore, but it's okay because it means we can spend time on other things. I type 90 words per minute. I used to be able to transcribe as officials were speaking. Well, Otter does that now. I used to memorize a lot of phone numbers. Well, that's all in your iPhone. And so, we take notes at public meetings. Well, that's also being transcribed. I mean, soon AI is going to be able to cover legislative hearings and tell you the basics of what happened.
It'll summarize everything.
It will summarize it, but that can be okay if journalists then turn their attention to things that only we can do for now. Context, put in the historical explanation, build trust with human sources, build trust with people affected by public policy. There's still a room for a lot. I think emotional intelligence its significance is going to continue to rise because the technical is going to be taken care of by some bot, I guess. But the ability to actually form authentic, meaningful connections, I find it hard to see a machine doing that right away.
I love this question. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. There's AI as the topic of conversation, I think, across this entire week for most people. And one thing I keep hearing over and over is, as a general principle, let's think about AI as something that will very likely make currently bad problems worse and potential upside better. And I do think, I'm so glad you framed it in the way that there are some obvious downsides. There's a lot of harm reduction and harm prevention that we need to do with AI. The information apocalypse, as Sewell said, is one of them. AI being used as a weapon, whether it's bio or in the defense, sector or other, is another obvious one. But there is a lot of, I think, potential upside, and this gets to the question of regulation. And the way we're thinking about it as a U.S. government, the way that a lot of our DC leadership is working with countries around the world is, how do we adequately regulate AI, knowing that it's moving so fast, it's moving faster than the pace of our ability to regulate it, to prevent those major harms, while also not closing ourselves off to the potential to fundamentally transform societies in the areas of education, healthcare, agriculture, and climate. There is an enormous potential to be teaching people language. There's enormous potential to be reaching people with healthcare services they could never otherwise have access to reform the way agriculture and food sustainability and food security are approached in the developing world. Those kinds of upsides should be as pursued as the ability to reduce harm, and that's at the heart of our regulation strategy. And what that requires is being able to have the right people around the table. And one thing that the State Department has been very intentional about is going beyond what might be normal coalitions of countries on any given issue, and recognizing that we can't just have technologically advanced countries at the table thinking about AI regulation. You need developing countries and developing democracies at the table as well to understand their equities. And I know we're almost short on time. Let me just say to the question, how am I thinking about this, how is our team thinking about this? Of course, in the information space, we're most worried about deep fakes and inauthentic content for all the reasons we've talked about. But actually, we're working on 2 initiatives for upside of AI. One is what Sewell mentioned, how do you use AI to summarize information? In our case, how do you give our ambassadors around the world a media summary of what's going on every day? We're going to save 180,000 man hours in the State Department and women hours next year by using an automated tool that Elaine's team built to help us analyze media narratives and press clips in a matter of seconds instead of in a matter of hours, including seconds. Yes. That's huge, to say nothing of communicating in multiple languages.
Absolutely. So speaking of languages, Matt, if you had a couple of words to just end on regarding AI, what would it be?
Yeah.
For me, the 2 words that come to mind are pre-bunking and debunking. So, right, this gets framed always as like, here's what people uninterested in truth, how they're going to use this in a malicious, destructive way. But as we just talked about, right, people interested in truth also have access to these same tools, and the ability to pre-bunk with big data analysis and debunk quickly with big data analysis is much better.
Perfect. Pre-bunking and debunking. I think we're going to end on the promise and peril of AI. And since we're at a university, I have to stress that I think that what is important, obviously, is education, starting, as I say, the day you're born and ending the day that you leave this earth, in the community, in all of our schools. Those higher level critical thinking skills are going to be so necessary. I want to, of course, thank Undersecretary Allen. It's such an honor and privilege to have you here, and all of our panelists and all of you for attending and your interest today. And of course, our coordinator here.
And on behalf of all the parties here, including the Global Disinformation Lab and Good Systems and UT more broadly, I'd like to present the Undersecretary with a small token of our appreciation.
Swag! And it's over! It's over! Oh, thank you. See, this is good. This is going on the desk.
You know, AI can tell us if it's on the desk or not. Just saying.
Thank you for having me, and thank you, Sherri, for moderating.
Thank you.
Thank you all for
Such an honor.
Hi everybody, just one other announcement, and there's some information in the back. For anyone who's looking to also come celebrate the other reason why the Undersecretary is here, music diplomacy around the world. Today we'll be hosting a showcase at Don's Depot here